Ukraine has struck deep inside Russia again, targeting the TANECO oil refinery in Nizhnekamsk, Tatarstan. But this was not just another refinery fire. Russian authorities reported civilian deaths and injuries, while Ukraine said the refinery was part of its campaign against Russia's energy infrastructure. The bigger question is why Kyiv keeps reaching so far into Russia to hit oil infrastructure, and whether damaging plants like TANECO can create pressure Moscow cannot easily absorb. On August 10th, Ukrainian drones reached Nizhnekamsk in Russia's Republic of Tatarstan, far from the Ukrainian border and deep inside one of the country's major industrial regions. Ukraine said the Tanako oil refinery was among the intended targets. Video from the area showed smoke rising near the refinery complex, while Ukrainian officials framed the strike as part of their continuing campaign against Russian energy infrastructure. But the attack also carried a serious civilian cost. Russian authorities reported at least 13 people killed and dozens injured in Nizhnekamsk. Reuters reported that several victims were foreign nationals from Central Asia, and that 9 people were killed at a hostel. AP reported a higher injury total than Reuters, so the number of wounded should still be treated as provisional as authorities update the record. Moscow accused Ukraine of terrorism and of striking civilians. Ukraine, by contrast, said the refinery was the target and described attacks on Russian energy infrastructure as part of its effort to pressure Moscow's war economy. The full damage picture at Tanako is still incomplete. Smoke and fire were visible, but publicly available reporting has not yet established how much refining equipment was damaged or how long any production disruption could last. What is clear is that Tanako has become a recurring target. The same refinery was hit earlier this year when previous reporting indicated a temporary interruption to processing. That makes August 10th more than an isolated raid. Ukraine is returning to a facility it clearly considers strategically important. TANECO matters because it is not a small regional refinery. It is a major modern refining complex operated by Tatneft in Tatarstan, one of Russia's most important oil-producing regions. The facility processes crude into a broad range of products. Tatneft's own product catalog lists automotive gasoline, Eurodiesel, several grades of aviation fuel, base oils, and other petroleum products. Ukrainian military reporting has described Taneco's design processing capacity as more than 16 million tons of crude per year, while Tatneft's older public material documents the refinery's large-scale expansion over time. That scale is strategically relevant, but the military connection needs to be described carefully. It would be misleading to suggest that every liter produced at Taneco goes directly to Russian forces. The refinery supports a much wider national fuel market, but modern warfare depends on that broader system. Trucks, aircraft, industry, construction, agriculture, and civilian transport all draw from refined fuel supply chains that also support the state's ability to sustain military operations. This is why a refinery can matter even when it is far from the battlefield. For Ukraine, the value of striking a plant like Taneco is not only the physical damage visible in a single attack. A serious hit can force inspections, repairs, production adjustments, and changes in distribution. It can also make a facility that once benefited from distance feel exposed to future strikes. The target, in other words, is both industrial capacity and Russia's assumption that deep infrastructure is relatively safe. The distance is what makes the strike technically significant. Nizhnekamsk lies deep inside Russia, far beyond the front line. Reaching it requires a long-range drone to travel a very large distance through Russian territory while avoiding or penetrating layers of detection, electronic warfare, and air defense. Ukraine has spent years expanding this capability. Its domestically produced long-range drones are slower than cruise missiles, but they offer a different trade-off. They can be built in larger numbers, launched repeatedly, and used against fixed targets far from the battlefield. AP reported that Ukrainian long-range drones are now capable of reaching targets more than 2,000 kilometers away. That changes the geography of the air war. Russia can no longer think only about protecting forces near Ukraine. Refineries, air bases, depots, and industrial sites hundreds of miles from the border can also require surveillance, electronic protection, or local air defense coverage. The more resources Russia commits to guarding deep infrastructure, the less flexibility it has to move those resources between other priorities. But Ukraine still has to overcome real defensive advantages. Long-range drones can be detected, jammed, diverted, or shot down, and Russia has been adapting by strengthening defenses around important facilities. This creates a continuing contest rather than a one-sided breakthrough. Ukraine is trying to exploit distance, scale, and cost. Russia is trying to improve detection and interception before drones reach valuable targets. The important measure is therefore not simply whether one drone gets through. It is whether Ukraine can continue generating enough successful penetrations to keep selected sites under recurring pressure despite Russian adaptation. The larger objective appears to be pressure on Russia's refining network, not the destruction of one plant. Russia remains one of the world's largest oil producers and operates a broad network of refineries. A single temporary outage at TANECO will not stop the war or leave the country without fuel. The potential effect comes from accumulation. When several refineries are damaged across different regions, operators may have to inspect units, delay maintenance elsewhere, shift crude flows, change product distribution, and move fuel over longer routes. Those changes can reduce the spare flexibility that normally helps a large system absorb local problems. Recent strikes show why this matters. Reuters reported in early August that Ukraine had intensified attacks on Russian refineries, contributing to fuel shortages in parts of the country, even though authorities had stabilized supplies in many areas. That is a more useful indicator than dramatic images of fire, whether repeated attacks begin to affect availability, transport, or regional distribution beyond the refinery fence. For the military, the consequence would likely be indirect before it became visible at the front. A stressed refining system can place additional demand on railways, storage sites, tanker trucks, and regional fuel reserves. Civilian consumers and industry remain part of the same national supply environment, so disruption can create competition and force prioritization. But this is not evidence that Russia's fuel system is collapsing. Moscow has significant capacity to reroute supplies, repair equipment, and shift production between facilities. The question is whether repeated strikes can raise the cost and complexity of those adjustments faster than Russia can restore normal operations. That is the real strategic contest inside the refinery campaign, not one explosion, but the cumulative strain placed on a large system that must keep functioning every day. Whether this strategy can meaningfully affect the war will be decided by persistence, not headlines. Ukraine has demonstrated that it can reach important energy sites deep inside Russia. The harder task is turning that reach into sustained strategic effect. For that to happen, refinery outages would need to last long enough, overlap often enough, or spread widely enough to create measurable problems in processing and distribution. Russia, meanwhile, is not standing still. It can harden facilities, improve electronic warfare, reposition mobile defenses, change detection patterns, and adjust logistics. It can also prioritize the most important refineries and fuel routes when resources are limited. Those adaptations mean a strike method that works today may become less effective later. There is also a human cost that must remain separate from the strategic analysis. Russian authorities reported 13 deaths in the August 10th attack, including a child, and many of the victims were reported at civilian accommodation. Ukraine said the refinery was the intended target, but the casualties are still part of the outcome and cannot be treated as irrelevant simply because the strike had an industrial objective. So what should viewers watch next? First, repair time. If damaged units return quickly, Russia is absorbing the attacks effectively. Second, simultaneous outages. Several major refineries facing disruption at once would matter more than repeated damage to one site. Third, regional fuel conditions. Persistent shortages, restrictions, or unusual redistribution would be evidence that refinery strikes are moving beyond symbolic damage. And fourth, Russian defensive changes. If more protection appears around deep energy infrastructure, that would show Moscow considers the threat serious enough to divert additional resources. TANECO matters because it sits at the intersection of all those questions. The strike does not prove that Russia's war economy is breaking. It does show that distance alone no longer guarantees safety for major industrial infrastructure. And that leaves the central question unresolved. Can Ukraine keep imposing enough disruption to create lasting pressure, or will Russia adapt faster than the strikes can accumulate? If you value evidence-led war analysis, subscribe for the next update, and tell us in the comments, which matters more here, physical refinery damage or the wider pressure created by forcing Russia to defend and repair deep infrastructure?